Great. Well, thank you. Thanks very much, Josefina, for the introduction. Thank you to HFSP for putting the session together. It's been really, really fascinating. So I'm not going to be nearly as entertaining, but I will take less of your time. But I do think I've got an important thing to say, and it's something I think needs some immediate attention. And so when anyone makes any kind of advance in life sciences or biomedical science, data are involved in some way. So typically people are producing data. They're almost always consuming other people's data, reference data, pre-existing data. And so very little happens in science without data being a really important currency and a really important part of the work. And as a consequence, the data resources, so the databases and the services, so the ways in which the platforms that the scientists use to share their data, to access other people's data, these are really, really critically important. And they exist, a large number of them around the world, and they make up a very important infrastructure. And the Global Biodata Coalition is an organization that came together really to safeguard that infrastructure, to make sure that the value of those data resources remains in place. And so just to illustrate from just from this session and some of the other sessions, we've had so many examples of people doing extraordinary things purely with data, and in many cases purely with data that pre-existed, that were generated for some other purpose. So data that were not designed for the purposes that the computational biologists put them to, but nonetheless that revealed some really extraordinary things. And if the Bourne timeline is correct, and we're at that turning point, then if data become the driver, then all of the data resources that serve those purposes will become even more important over time. And so, so what I'm going to do is I'll say a little bit about GBC to introduce it, a little bit about what we are, how we work, and then I'll move on to give some examples of things we're doing at the moment to illustrate. And so, well, the data resources are absolutely crucial. One can't advance without them. It's a very important infrastructure, but unlike most scientific infrastructures, it's very distributed. We know that there are several thousand data resources around the world that are really important. And there's no one in charge. No one's saying, right, we need this data resource over here, we need that. They're not coordinated centrally. What happens is a community or even a single team will identify they'll be working in a particular domain of science, or they'll be working on a particular data type. They need to build some kind of data resource for themselves. They share it with their collaborators, it becomes important for other people, and they open it up. And so the tradition is that things grow from the ground up based on requirements, which is fantastic because needs are often served, but it creates some challenges, and it means that there is no overview of all of this from above. So it's all very open, it's very connected. So Joe this morning showed some examples of how the data resources don't really operate alone. There's a huge value from the connectivity between them, and actually that the value that one can get from the connected data resources is far greater than the sum of the individual parts if they're working alone. Highly connected in that they exist in an ecosystem where they interoperate. It's cost effective. I don't think this is really questioned so much anymore, but it's typically completely unaffordable or even impossible to reproduce data sets. So we should be storing many of the biological data sets we produce and reusing them. And there are great opportunities. So life science has become far more data intensive and will become extremely data intensive. And so if we get this right with the data resources underneath all of this, then we have a really powerful opportunity. It's a great enabler, but we have to get it right. And there are challenges. And the first challenge is sustainability. There are, in a stable system, we would be challenged anyway, but things are growing all the time. And so the rate at which all the different assay platforms produce data grows all the time, often with increasing rate. So we see more and more data piling up to be dealt with by the data resources. We love open access. It's fantastic, but it does place extra demand on the data resources. There are many new technologies emerging all the time. They produce new data types. They tackle new scientific questions. These need the data resources to extend, or we need new data resources. And we've heard all about the data science and the challenges that this will bring. Surely in the rate at which we will be expected from these data resources to provide the world with data. So there are sustainability challenges relating to the way these resources grow up, the way the infrastructure is taken from in a ground-up direction. There are no really sustainable funding programs to deal with data resources. Typically, they grow from research-centric funding streams, and it's quite short-term. People find themselves being reviewed after 3 years or 5 years. And so the framework for funding these resources really doesn't lend itself to strategic thinking and long-term planning. Just to illustrate that on the right there, so this is a plot from a few years ago. This is looking at the Elixir core data resources. So these are fairly generalist, substantial data resources that are accessed, many times every minute by scientists around the world. So these are substantial and established and long-lasting. But they were asked the question in 2018: well, how many full-time equivalent staff? So it's just about the staffing working directly on the data resources. How many full-time staff do you have at the moment? How many do you have committed funding for next year, the following year, and the year after that? And so, sure, they could say in 2018, when the survey was run, yeah, in 2019 we'll be okay, or we'll have current numbers. 2020, yes, more or less the same, beginning to drop in 2021, but within a 4-year window, we've had a really substantial drop in the number of guaranteed staff. Now, actually, many of these, and I hope most of these, would have gone on to actually have more staff than that. So if you ask the question again, the pattern may look similar. But if you have that 4-year window, how can you recruit the right staff and retain the right staff? How can you secure the hardware you need, have the contract with the cloud provider? It doesn't allow you to strategize. So the fundamental issue is that it is an infrastructure, but it isn't managed as an infrastructure should be. And this is what we need to address. And so the Global Biodata Coalition comes together as a coalition of life science research funding organizations of different types. They recognize that it's critical that there is an infrastructure comprised of these data resources. It is absolutely critical to the progress of their life science research programs. They recognize that the system is threatened because of the sustainability issues, and they commit to try to find ways better to cooperate globally to secure the health and the sustainability of these data resources. And on the right there is the letter of understanding in which they agree to these things and to work together. And so the members, currently we have 11 members of GBC. They are national funders, a couple of foundations, an international organization and an international facing organization. We have at any one time, a number of observer organizations. So we have 5 at the moment, and these are on different stages along a path to membership. We have a very active scientific advisory committee. We met again yesterday while we were here. Working groups for expert review panels and so on, and a small but busy secretariat. So our aims are to be a forum funders of biodata resources, enabling better coordination and sharing of approaches and strategies for efficient management and growth of its infrastructure, and to stabilize and ensure sustainable financial support for the global biodata infrastructure with a focus on an identified and prioritized set of global core biodata resources that are crucial for sustaining the broader infrastructure. And I'll talk a bit more about those core data resources in a moment. So the way we work is really to bring thinking and alignment between 2 different communities, and the pillars here. So on the left we have the biodata resources, and this is the community of people who set up and operate data resources. On the right, the people that work in the life science research funding organizations, and our job really is to work with both of these groups to define, develop, and evaluate models through which funders can cooperate globally, and then help both sides move towards these models. And I stress that this is something in the middle. I think this is conceptual change and behavioral change from both of these communities. It's not that one is wrong and has to change, it's that they both have to build something and work together. So this is a substantial social exercise. So a few of the things we're doing. One challenge with the infrastructure is that we all know about lots of data resources, but no one actually knows about all of them. And there is no definitive list. There are catalogs and there are registries, but there's nothing definitive. So we set about trying to come up with a list that was useful for our purposes. It doesn't have everything in it, but the starting point was that if one had a data resource that one wanted to promote and have people use it, one would write a paper about it. And so this is a scholarly literature mining exercise to find the diversity of data resources around the world. And so this was presented on Monday afternoon in the NIH ODSS Elixir session at this meeting by Heidi Imke, who was the lead on this work. And so essentially this was a mining exercise to find papers that are descriptions of data resources, and then an exercise to go in and find certain bits of information about them. So information about funders, information about the where they are, information about the authors of these, the authors of the papers and the people who built the data resources. So there are a couple of preprints there. The first one is about the study itself. The second one is about the methodology. And we were very keen to make this completely reproducible and fully open. And so anyone can pick up this method and run it again. And we want to be able to run it again in future to have an ongoing check on the diversity and the breadth of resources around the world. But anyway, the process led to some 3,000, just over 3,000 different data resources. We knew about quite a lot of those, but there are some surprises, things we didn't know about, and there's quite a lot of diversity in that. And so what we can do with that is pretty powerful for GBC. It gets us access to the people that run the data resources in these 3,000 data resources. We don't know all of these people. There's no society that brings them all together. So, and it's a long tail. Some of them are very small. So we have access to the people, but we also have access to the funders because we were able to pull out some of the funding information. And there's a large number of funders. Some of them are very, very small and very specific and university or university department specific, but some of them are major funders as well. So another aspect of characterizing and classifying within this ecosystem is to look for the major players. And this was the Global Core Biodata Resource exercise. And so we believe that like a biological ecosystem, that there are a set of keystone, where you have a set of keystone species that may be feeding nutrients into the system or having a particularly connected important function, that there are data resources that have the equivalent. So a global core biodata resource is highly connected. It's feeding data, it's aggregating data, it is used by many people, and it's a part of the network that if you increase its sustainability, you're likely to affect positively all of the things around it. So the reason to focus on these is that we think that everything can rise if we can help the global core biodata resources. And so there's a set of criteria and a selection process. They have to be free and open access, used extensively, run professionally, high scientific quality, valuable to users, and they're typically large and they're typically well established as well to achieve all of these things. There are links to publications about this. It's all on the website. But essentially, we ran a selection round, and many of you, or certainly many people at this meeting, were reviewers on that, and some of you were submitters of data resources as well. And so the selection was of 37 after this two-stage process, and we've been working with the managers of these data resources in the GCBR forum, as we call it, to try to work out how we take things forward, and I'll come back to that. And so we didn't catch everything. We're aware of that, so we're running another round. We finished the expressions of interest, and the second round is coming later this year. So we expect to be adding a few more core data resources at the end of this year or perhaps early next year. And so just to reflect back to some comments that Joe made earlier on about the need for various players around the world to work together to collect data, to organize data. For some of the very big data resources, one institute alone can't do all the work. There's some global partnership already, but this needs to expand. But also to reflect back to what Amber was telling us about the importance of working globally with scientists around the world and governments around the world to make sure that science continues to happen and data continue to be shared and we continue to thrive in a comprehensive and integrated way. Just plotting some distributions here of so at the top we have where the data resources are running. So this is where the data resources exist. So on the left we have all, so that's what 3,000 from the inventory. On the right we have the GCBRs, the core resources. And then on the bottom, we're looking for the same groupings. We're looking at where the funders are. This is looking at the number of funders, not the extent of funding. That would probably exaggerate the picture a bit more, but just looking at the number of funders. So on the left, we're looking at all. On the right, again, we're looking at the GCBRs. And while there is, a good spread, there's a clear uneven distribution around the world. Just a note, if you took away one of the global core biodata resources, most of the light blue would disappear. So actually, for the global core biodata resources, the geographical distribution of the funders is markedly small. The Global Biodiversity Information Facility (GBIF) has a very broad funding profile, and that's where all the light blue comes from. Or most of the light blue. But what we're seeing is an uneven distribution. And I think that in order for us to continue to be able to share data and have comprehensive data sets, we really need to be able to address these imbalances. So certainly we want more parts of the world to be contributing to the funding of data resources, but we also want more scientists to be feeding their data into the system and actually participating at the level of the infrastructure, at the level of participating in providing the resources themselves. And I think when you have that, you will have much greater trust in the system, and any global organization will be much easier to manage because you'll have real contribution to and benefit from that's much more evenly distributed around the world. So to step back to the GCBR, so we set up a forum, as I mentioned. We are having regular discussions, trying to pick up the common interests and to share information, ultimately to build a singular, a consistent voice and take the right messages to communicate the needs, to communicate the requirements and the challenges to the funding communities. And ultimately, this will be the group that evaluates the mechanisms that we come up with and ultimately implements them. And so the text has been covered up there, but one of the key things here is that sustainability needs to be defined because it means different things to different people. And actually, at the core is funding. People have funding problems, and that's often the first thing that people will say when they talk about sustainability. But actually, funding alone is not sufficient. So if you're a data resource, there are many other elements of sustainability you need to consider. If you're a funder, you need to consider different elements. And the risk is that if those two groups don't define sustainability in the same way, it's going to be more difficult to find a solution. And so this is just a mind map of our thinking at the moment on sustainability, but the GCBR forum will set to work in really defining this. And the aim is to have a set of indicators for sustainability that can be used to evaluate the extent of sustainability for a data resource or for the complete set of data resources, and be used as a set of guidance as to what needs to be built and what needs to be supported. But I can just, if you can probably read this version. So I'm just looking at the left-hand side. So this is what a set of indicators that relate to sustainability from the perspective of an individual data resource. Finances, the personnel, can you recruit the right kind of people? Can you retain people? Are you a compelling career option? Do you have a community around you that are consuming the data and valuing the data? Do you have the right data feeds? Are you partnering with the right data resources? Everything is connected, so it matters what you're connected to and how sustainable they are. Are you fitting in with publishers well? Are you fitting in with policy and regulation? Are you relevant to what people are trying to do? Are you hosted well, technically, governance? So that a whole set of different elements to sustainability. If you ask a funding organization or perhaps one of the institutions that runs a lot of data resources, you'll get an overlapping set of indicators, but there'll be some different ones as well. And so typically a funder cares about the whole of the landscape, the collectivity, the collection of all of the data resources that their researchers have access to. They care about life cycle. So we heard about life cycle for data resources with when an area of science becomes less important or a technology is no longer used, how do you gracefully sunset something without losing the data, but perhaps you reduce the services? So an awareness of or a system, an ecosystem that has appropriate life cycling and mechanisms for that, a system that doesn't have monopolies, but it doesn't have too much redundancy, a system that's efficient overall, a system that is agile enough to be able to respond to new needs that data resources can extend or new resources can emerge. So a whole set of different but related elements of sustainability. So this model, I think, will be really important in defining and evaluating the extent to which data resources and the whole infrastructure are sustainable. So another piece of work, this is now on the right-hand pillar, so this is on the funder side. There are two working groups that have been working really deeply and broadly on two different topics. And the first one is sustainability. So this group has, for example, thought about the kind of premises one makes when thinking about sustainable data resources, and defined a set of principles, and then suggested a set of models, so possible mechanisms that could be used to globally cooperate. And the second one is on open data, and again, a set of interesting issues that it's raised that relate to this area. So both of these groups have produced consultation papers, and these will be released within the next few months, and we'll be inviting people to comment on these. But there's a lot of content in there, and it defines a lot of the strategy for GBC. So please look out for those, and we hope to get a lot of response from that. And so finally to mention, this is the set of the distribution, the set of funding organizations that are members. We're on the lookout for new members, and a lot of our work is about promoting GBC and raising awareness. I'm running out of time, so I won't go into detail here, but there's always a timeline of places and we're going to and people we're talking to. But we're very interested in talking to data resources that are represented here, funders are represented here. We're very keen to understand stories, challenges, and connect with people. And so just finally, to acknowledge people. So this is the Secretariat on the right-hand side. Small, but very busy and very active. Board members, observers, the working groups, GCBR Forum, and others who participate through review processes and other processes. And thank you very much for your time.
Maybe you have time for one quick question.
How does all of this relate to me, a simple professor in a university who will create databases and they will die after the students graduate?
So it relates to anyone who's consuming data or producing data, because the risk is if we don't fix sustainability that things go away. And so if you're producing data, you're almost certainly using pre-existing data from some open database to compare. So one, data alone are often meaningless. There needs to be comparison. So the existence of the infrastructure matters for all of the tools that we use and all of the analysis we do. For databases that we make as part of a project that are used internally within the research, they're not necessarily, if they're not opened up to people, they don't have a community around them, then it's not expected that all of these need to continue. But the work.
Our papers.
Sorry.
We publish our papers. We make our databases open.
Yeah, but it might. But this doesn't mean to say that every database that's made has to be sustained forever. But it means that there has to be a path to sustaining important data sets. And so if there are data sets in those databases that you're publishing in the papers, if you're not going to maintain the database for a long time and there's a significant external usage, then it's important to look for options to publish those data in a database that does have sustainability. But it matters. It matters. So as a professor, it matters because if these go away, if these go away, then our science will suffer. And so every time there's a review, every time you're reviewing a paper, every time you're reviewing a grant or you're advising a funder on a panel, then this perspective, it doesn't have to be a major component of any one funding project, but the perspective that there is release of data into databases, that databases have support, that needs to be there. So the awareness needs to be there in all of the data science that we do and all of the experimental science that we do.
Last quick question, because we're quite behind on time, please.
So I think we really need this, but looking at your numbers, they're like really big numbers in terms of resources, of number of databases you are looking at. And then it came to me, okay, this is going to be difficult to start, but what about maintaining it? How are the funders going to be like in 5 years and say, we've started funding this infrastructure, is this thing even relevant? Who is evaluating if this is still relevant? What happens to the positions that we paid for, or the university asks, we made permanent positions to take care of these resources, but actually this is gone technology that no one cares about. We are still paying for the position. How do we recycle this? So on the long term, how do you envision maintaining the whole concept running, not just for the new incoming databases, but for the older ones?
So I think the last thing we want is a system where you're sustaining everything that's ever built. That's the through understanding what's in the ecosystem, understanding that long tail, we hope to find, we may find redundancies, people repeating the same work. We may find things that are actually captured elsewhere. So if we have more awareness of the system, we can identify where we should focus effort. But specifically for those data resources that have a limited shelf life, or they have a limited value, then we have to have processes that assess that and allow them to reduce. And it may well be that the data remain important, the services are no longer specific, or the services are no longer important, but you need data, and there are very many examples of where data resources have stopped to exist in isolation, but the data have been put somewhere else where they're still accessible and discoverable and so on. So all those mechanisms have to be there. So this has to be, we have to think of this, or the funders will want to think of this more of an infrastructure than they do at the moment.